For the Mother's Day piece of it, I think what's important with that is there's so many different emotions. There's no right or wrong. And so, however you're feeling about it is totally valid. The most important piece is just being aware of that, being gentle with yourself, leaning on your support system, and being able to advocate and ask for what you need. In the more general sense, we all have so much inner strength and inner resilience that oftentimes we're not even aware of. So I think it's just being gentle with yourself, having that self compassion, trying to find a way to generate those moments of meaning, those moments of joy, of connection, seeking support, relying on those support systems if we're struggling.
Welcome to my fertility podcast, Superhumans.
A space for honest conversations, expert insights, and stories of resilience.
Whether you're just getting started on your fertility journey, facing challenges, or looking to educate yourself, you are in the right place.
We are Dr. Mavis Garcia
and Dr. Wise,
fertility specialists at Markham Fertility Center located in Markham, Ontario, Canada.
Think of us as your biggest cheerleaders. Let's demystify the world of fertility together.
So Mother's Day, tough days for anybody who's going through a fertility journey, whether you are a single mother by choice or in a same-sex relationship or in a heterosexual relationship. It can bring up so many complex emotions. And today we're going to talk about it with Brittany Marshall, who is a registered social worker and psychotherapist with over a decade of experience. She has provided psychotherapy to children, adolescents, and family across Ontario for many years. She earned her Master's of Social Work from the University of Toronto in 2016 and has worked in a range of settings, including hospital, family health teams, post-secondary institution, and private practice. Brittany brings both clinical expertise as well as the lived experience to her work. Having personally navigated infertility and becoming a parent through IVF, she's deeply passionate about supporting people through their fertility journeys. She's also committed to supporting healthcare professionals working in this field with a focus on emotional well-being, communication, and burnout prevention. Her approach, we love it because it's like what we believe, compassionate, collaborative, and grounded in helping individuals build resilience and meaningful coping strategies. You can follow Brittany on socials at Brittany Marshall Counseling.
Welcome to my fertility podcast, Brittany. We're very glad to have you here today and to talk about a very important topic. But before we get to that, why don't you tell us about yourself, the work that you do, and also how that relates back to the fertility community?
Of course. Thank you for having me. I must say it's a bit of a full circle moment to be here because I have two little ones thanks to you and the team at Markham Fertility. But if we back up further than that, I got my master's in social work about 10 years ago now and have always been a little bit of a generalist working in hospitals and family health teams and colleges. But I've always loved working with kids and teenagers. And that was really a passion of mine. And got married, traveled, and then decided that we wanted to start having a family. And I think like a lot of people just assumed that it would happen naturally and easily. And needless to say, there was some possible chemicals along the way and abnormal ultrasounds, which resulted in a referral to Markham Fertility. And we met Dr. Wise. And we did the basic testing, which showed that we were dealing with male factor infertility, which I almost feel like could be a whole other podcast episode because it brought up a lot of feelings for me, also feelings for my husband, and just a whole sort of array of just emotions and feelings and extra obstacles to manage. But, we were told that IVF was our best chance of success. And so we were very fortunate enough that we went through that process and we did our first transfer, which resulted in our daughter, who will be 4. So she was born in 2022. And then 18 months later, we transferred our final euploid embryo, which resulted in our son in 2024. And then fast forward to kind of more recently. And I think throughout my journey of going through infertility and needing IVF, I tried numerous times to seek out therapy, but found it really hard to find somebody who really understood the infertility landscape and had experience with IVF or was at least familiar with just some of the jargon. And I know that I had a couple sessions where I just found myself spending most of the time explaining what was involved and meeting with clinicians who I felt like they didn't really get it. They didn't really understand what it had been like. And even after I was fortunate enough to have kids, there was so much guilt. And I dealt with, postpartum depression. And I think that was just even worse because, it was all I ever wanted. And so I really began to reflect on that. And throughout my own journey, once I kind of worked through all of my issues, started focusing a bit more on that. And then end of January, just transitioned full time into private practice. So I'm now working in person in Pickering and in Markham, and then also doing virtual across Ontario, working with, anxiety and depression and lots of those issues, but also focusing a lot on infertility and supporting people through that experience and hopefully providing them with hope, but also kind of combining that personal and that professional lens. And then I've done some presentations and public speaking at different clinics, and I will be presenting at CFAS in May as well. So it's definitely something that I'm just really passionate about. And I also find just really, really rewarding as well.
I find it so incredible when people who have gone through fertility, gone through infertility, fertility treatments, that they then take that energy and then they are feeding it back into the fertility community, right? And almost like feeding back, at the risk of sounding really corny, it's kind of like making lemonade out of lemons almost, And it's such an incredible thing because you are really paying it back to the community and sort of giving back to the community, which is such an incredible thing to see. And I'm always so amazed by the patients who go on to do that. I think it's just such a beautiful thing.
Thank you. And I think it's something that for me came naturally and was something that I never expected. And it was definitely not until I was able to work through and have my own therapy and connect those pieces for myself that then I was like, okay, I'm now ready to actually talk even openly about it. And I know that was a conversation I had with my husband in terms of how comfortable, how open are we with sharing, some of these pieces, especially because it was male factor, but also just in that journey. And like, I remember being so terrified of IVF and going into it. And, I was like, there's no way I could do IVF. I'm not strong enough. And I remember you were like, don't worry, we're not there yet, like baby steps, and then got the results. And it was like, oh, actually we are there. And so I think you guys are dealing with all those emotions and all those pieces. And it's such a mixed bag of emotional, physical, financial, spiritual stress that goes into it that isn't talked enough. And I think it wasn't until I started to be open that so many people came forward with their own stories. And I only wish that I had known that when I was in the thick of it. And so I think now with me being open, there's so many other people in my life or just complete strangers who have reached out, and we've been able to connect and bond over that.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that, Brittany. I want to ask you, given your extensive personal and professional experience, I want to talk about Mother's Day because I think Mother's Day has to be the worst day of the year, honestly, for people who are struggling with infertility. I know it was for me when I was going through that. Christmas was a close second. And then from other people, it's like, Easter's and Halloween. I never really celebrated those things growing up, so they didn't really do very much for me when I was going through my journey. But Mother's Day for sure was really, really hard. This episode is coming out around Mother's Day, and we want to make sure that we use your valuable insights and experience to help our patients cope with this day. It can bring a lot of emotions, of course. What are coping mechanisms that you would share for somebody who is anticipating Mother's Day coming up and having a lot of things being brought up to the surface and not really being sure how to deal with it?
Yeah, for sure. And I can definitely relate to that on a personal note too, right? Mother's Day is a hard holiday, so to speak, to get through. And I think the first step in all that is just acknowledging that piece of it and naming and normalizing those emotions, and that two emotions can coexist at the same time, right? So we can feel grief, we can feel sadness, but we can also be hopeful at the same time. And so even just taking a moment to identify those feelings and work our way through that, begin to process that, begin to express that can be really, really helpful. I think another piece of that is setting those boundaries. I think that stems from the communication piece of it, of being able to recognize what our needs are, what our capacities are, and more so our emotional capacity, recognizing that this is a day that is going to hit likely heavier and harder than other days. And so finding a way to express those needs. And so it might look like limiting time on social media. It might look like saying no to plans, to events. It might look like shortening some of those gatherings. It might look like, declining invites, or maybe you're doing it the Saturday night as opposed to the Sunday morning. Like those pieces are also going to be really, really important, but making sure that you're able to come up with a plan of how you're going to deal with it, and scheduling something for yourself, scheduling something nurturing, scheduling something that you can kind of indulge in, that you can look forward to, that could be a massage, it could be going for a walk, it could be something kind of unrelated to Mother's Day itself, but just kind of finding a way to reframe that and making sure that you're having those check-ins with yourself. One of my favorite kind of techniques to use to just ground yourself back to the present moment is the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 grounding technique, where we name 5 things that we can see, 4 things that we can touch, 3 things that we can hear, 2 that we can smell, and 1 that we can taste. Because oftentimes our mind is transporting us to the past or to the future. And when we think about the future, that can often be anxiety provoking. And then when we think about the past, sometimes that can be a recipe for depression. And so if we can use our breath and use our senses to really center us, to really ground us, to bring us back to the here and the now, that can be something really, really powerful, because the reality is that's all we have is just the present moment of the here and now. And then circling back, I guess, to the Mother's Day piece too, would be maybe redefining what Mother's Day is, what it looks like, and finding a way to honor, maybe it's the nurturing qualities that you have within yourself. Maybe it's your own strength, your own resiliency that you've been able to tap into, and finding a way to create meaning out of this day that might look maybe less traditional.
Those are really fantastic suggestions and really practical suggestions in terms of what to do. You know, one thing I wanted to also bring up, which you kind of alluded to earlier, was when there's a couple, right? When there's, let's say, one person who is actively trying to conceive and they may or may not have a partner. How can that partner, who maybe, let's say, is not going through it in the same way, support the person that is going through, let's say, the fertility treatments, especially on Mother's Day? And what can that look like? And then I guess also the thing is, with something like Mother's Day, you may have your own mother, grandmother,
Mhm.
in-laws, sister-in-laws, etc., for whom, you want to celebrate. And so how do you kind of balance that in all of this?
That's a great question. And that's one of the unique pieces with Mother's Day, is there's often going to be your own mother or grandmothers or in-laws, and there might be complicated dynamics. There might be other relationships and other things at play. So sometimes it might be trying to find that compromise, trying to find a bit of a balance. I remember when I was going through my IVF cycle, I had them sent off for the PGT testing. And I remember having some people saying to me like, "Oh, you're still a mother that way, and you have your M babies," and things like that. And I didn't really resonate with that. And so I remember that Mother's Day in particular being really challenging. And so we actually went to a stand-up comedy show, and we went the Saturday night. Now, I got lucky in that Mother's Day was not a topic for them to do the comedy on, because it could have gone differently. But I purposely and intentionally planned that so that we actually didn't have to talk about things. I didn't want there to be a discussion and then some of the awkwardness, because at that point I wasn't really sure how to navigate those pieces of it. So it might be thinking about, can we maybe celebrate it a different day? Can we do something else? Can we create a new tradition that isn't necessarily centered around the Mother Day in particular, but doing something else? And then I think going back to your question about partners and support people, partners often want to help, but they're not sure how. They're not sure how to go about it. And so often what happens is people avoid, and instead they really don't say anything. They might not do anything because they're afraid of saying the wrong thing. And I think it's really important to be able to acknowledge what's happening. And that could look like saying something like, I know that Mother's Day is approaching, and I know that that can be really hard. I'm here for you. How can I best support you? What would you like to do that day? What would you like to do on that weekend? And asking them directly. And then if they're really not sure, then maybe taking the lead. Would you like to have a weekend away? Would you like to go somewhere else? Would you like to keep things low key? Or even saying, hey, I'd like to book that massage appointment for you. You really deserve it. So finding ways to kind of speak to, maybe it's their love language, to kind of tap into that so that they still feel validated, they still feel important, and they're not feeling alone. And I think it's really important for partners to understand that their job is not to fix it. They cannot fix infertility. They cannot fix those pieces of it. Their job and their role is really to support us through that process. And being there can be such a huge, powerful piece of that. And they can help to maybe protect you from triggers. So maybe they can talk to the parents, they can talk to the in-laws, they can kind of figure out a way to advocate for all of your needs and kind of run interference, so to speak, so it can take off some of that pressure or even the mental load of preparing for kind of that piece of it. But I think it's about trying to not take on too much of that weight, trying not to be the strong, in a heterosexual kind of dynamic. It might be that macho man kind of reality piece, but being able to express that, yeah, this is hard for me too. And maybe not burdening them on that day, but making sure that they're also able to express those things and that they're getting their own therapy, they're getting their own support, they're having their own, journaling and utilizing their own coping skills, but making sure that at least on that day that they're there. And the other thing that we find happens a lot with these holidays is sometimes the anticipation of it, the build up to it, can actually be worse than the day itself. So sometimes I'll have patients who will say, hey, I was so worried about this event or this day. But then the day comes and they were fine. And often it's because we've worked through all these layers of it. We've processed it. We've gone through it before. So then it actually makes that day a little bit easier too.
You hit the nail on the head there that Mother's Day is not just about the person going through infertility, but the extended family as well. And I can imagine, I know I was there, but I can imagine people going through it thinking, wow, I'm going to be called out as selfish. I'm going to be called out as jealous because I'm not going out to celebrate the in-laws or the sisters-in-laws and this and that. I can also see a situation of conflict where a partner is saying, it's my parents, it's my sister-in-law, like we have to go, like, we have to do something.
The tradition.
It's so rude if we don't show up, and et cetera, et cetera. Can you give us maybe even a script or, a way to navigate that conflict when somebody's saying, it's not a big deal. It's just a day. It's just a family dinner like any other. It's going to be very disrespectful to the rest of the family not to go. And for another partner feeling like, I can't do it. Like, I cannot do this.
I think that's a really important question. And I think that's something that comes up a lot, right? And it can be this tender balance between navigating everybody's needs, everybody's wants, everybody's expectations. And I think ultimately it comes down to what is the meaning that you have with Mother's Day, right? And so what does it mean to each person? And so it might be finding a way to keep in line with those traditions, but maybe you're also starting a new tradition, right? And so if you're looking for a script, it might look like, I understand that traditionally on Mother's Day, we always go to, this restaurant for brunch. However, given that I am at this point in my fertility journey, that's going to be a trigger for me. And I don't think I have capacity for that. Is there a way that we could go for a walk beforehand and then you guys go off to brunch together? Right? Is it possible that I just partake in a little bit of it? Right? If we always go to X restaurant on Mother's Day exactly, is it possible that we go to that restaurant, but we're doing it maybe the weekend before, where there's not going to be a big sign about their Mother's Day brunch promotion, right? Now, if you're at the point that you haven't opened up for whatever reason about what you're going through, then that conversation might look different of saying, hey, unfortunately, we have plans that day, but we are available on X day, right? So finding a way to set that boundary, making sure that you're respectful of your own needs and communicating that, but you're also being respectful of them and acknowledging the tradition, but proposing some different options to that as well. But I think Mother's Day has so much different meaning to different people. And so it's not black or white. Like, it doesn't have to be we either celebrate it or we ignore it completely, right? Maybe there's a middle ground somewhere in the middle.
And along those lines, I can imagine there are some people who are very public about their journeys and their cycles, and their families and friends they might be posting on social media and all that stuff. And there are some people for whom their journeys are much more private, and then they may sort of talk about them after the fact, as you mentioned earlier. What do you say to the well-meaning, let's say, family members who might bring up things on Mother's Day like, oh, when is it your turn? Or, you're not getting any younger. I can just imagine.
Next year, we're going to be celebrating you.
I love the fact that you still remember what people told you on Mother's Day before you had kids. And I know how old your kids are.
Yeah.
And yet it's still stuck, right?
But the fact that Dr. Garcia even remembers that, and I'm sure has those vivid memories of who said it, speaks to the emotional weight and the volume and the impact that it has on you, because even though they might be well-intended, they're really hurtful and there's so much weight that goes into that. It's a really tricky thing to navigate. And again, I think you alluded to this, right? It depends on your comfort level. When we were going through it, it was really only my parents that knew about it. I was also lucky that it was like the tail end of COVID the first time. So I felt like people were kind of like hunkered down and really private going through that piece either. But I think the communication piece is important, of even just saying something like, that's not really something that we want to discuss right now. Or if they're saying, you're next, it could be saying something playful and going along with it. Like, yeah, I hope so too. Or we'll see what's written in the cards or something like that, where you're not ignoring it. You're not dismissing it. You're acknowledging it, but you're not adding fuel to the fire. If it's something that continues and it's something that's really hurtful or really direct, like those questions of, when are you going to have kids? Or you should have had kids, or your biological clock is ticking, something like that, then that might be where you have to set that boundary of just saying, like, I appreciate your concern. And that's something that was a decision between me and so, or that's something that we're thinking about. I don't really want to discuss this like right here, right now. And then if it continues, then we kind of get more and more assertive to the point that it might be saying something like, I'd really appreciate it if you don't bring that up anymore.
Definitely challenging, definitely tough to do.
Yeah. Easier said than done, right? And sometimes it is like having little cue cards, right? Or I'll have clients that they actually will put sticky notes, or they'll put reminders on their phone, and they'll put little scripts or have their little cheat sheet. I have a client and she's spoken to her mom, and she's gotten her mom to relay that message to some extended family of, hey, she doesn't really want to talk about X, Y, and Z, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to be coming from you. Maybe it's your partner's family. And so is that a role that your partner could then take on to be the one to help communicate that message? Because the more and more that we're repeating things too, that also adds to just the emotional weight and the heaviness of the situation too. And it's just that constant reminder that you're not where you want to be, right?
And that, even some of your worth or like how people view you is like wrapped up in your fertility and your ability to procreate.
Absolutely. And that's that male factor piece too, right? That I know
Right.
I really struggled with, my husband really struggled with. I know he felt really helpless because he had so much self-blame, but then felt really helpless because he was like, I can't really do much to actually help, but he drove me to every single appointment. He waited in the car. Like that was his way of contributing and ensuring that I was feeling supported. So I think a lot of it is, even though it's going to be, the female partner going through so much of the actual procedures and appointments, they can still offer support in different ways too. That might be more the practical pieces of it.
I think one thing that is worth reflecting on is, the day Mother's Day is to celebrate mothers because mothers have love to give. Mothers sacrifice for their children. And if you think about it, somebody who's not yet a mother, but going through fertility journey, it's doing all of those things. It's full of love. It's wanting to give that love. It's making the appointments to the clinic really early in the morning and doing the needles and having the courage to show up and have hard, difficult conversations. So I feel like if Mother's Day is to celebrate that mother's love, that connection to your child, that sense of sacrifice that mothers generally are associated with, then people going through fertility should be celebrated in that same vein because they are doing exactly that and more. What would be some thoughtful ways that somebody might say, you know what, I'm not a mother, but I should be celebrated today because the spirit of this day very much applies to me?
Absolutely. And I think that's a really good way of almost reframing Mother's Day, right? Is by focusing on the motherly aspects of it, which to me is basically what you described, right? Really nurturing, really caring, demonstrating the love that you show to maybe animals, your coworkers, other family members, right? So it could be finding a way to kind of honor that piece and even recognizing internally, right? Your own intention, your own courage, your own vulnerability, the strength, those nurturing qualities that you have. And so that could look like journaling, it could look like reflection, it could look like planting a flower, something that symbolizes growth and symbolizes kind of those pieces that come into the Mother's Day piece of maybe it's creating a new ritual. Maybe it's choosing to name it something different, right? And have your own kind of piece of that. And there's no right or wrong. I think it's ultimately whatever feels right to you in that moment, too.
I know for me, when I was going through that, I used to write, when I journal a lot, but part of my journaling was writing letters to my future children, to my future me as a mother. Something along the lines of like Mavis of 2026. This was back in many years ago. You're here now and you have children and you're a mother, but I'm here today in 2012. It would be like a conversation between my present self and my future self. And sometimes I wrote letters to my children. I would say, like, where are you? Like, come on.
Yeah.
Get here now.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in that, right? Putting it out into the universe, right?
Yeah.
That manifestation piece, right?
Yeah.
If that's something that really resonates with you, then it can be writing a letter to your former self, your future self. I know I wrote letters when I went through all the testing and all those pieces
Yeah.
of it to the little embryos, but that's something that brings you meaning, gives you hope, right? You need those symbols. Maybe it's the pineapple symbol. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's that necklace that you have that kind of symbolizes that piece of it. It might come in the form of, spirituality or religious practices, prayer. Meditation can also be really powerful. So sometimes doing a guided meditation where you're actually immersing yourself in what that life would be like, envisioning what you would be like as a mom. And again, when I say mom, it can just be that motherly figure, right? Like I look at my own life, even before coming a mom, I had lots of other, of my friends' kids and things like that that would call me. It wasn't necessarily mommy, but it was like auntie, where I assumed that same kind of a role, right? So figuring out what that piece looks like for you.
That's what I'm hearing kind of the most out of this, I think, is that it's really important to look at yourself and to figure out what you yourself may need or benefit from or how you see Mother's Day. thinking everybody is so different in terms of what they may need. Someone's partner is out there listening and they're like, oh, I'm going to plant this flower for my partner. Really should talk with them and chat with them and to see whether that is actually helpful or beneficial to them. Because it's so, so individual. Dr. Christine and I, we always joke, but she's always the journaler and the letter writer. And she's the one who's so deep in thought with words. I am very different in terms of how I deal with my emotions. I'm much more action and doing things. And if somebody told me to journal, I would, well, the worst.
I do have hope for you still, Dr. Weiss. I'm working on you.
But you might not be someone who would benefit then from just giving you a piece of paper and saying, here you go. So sometimes
Exactly.
I'll send clients journal prompts, right?
Yeah.
And I'll have one that's centered on resiliency or different topics where I'm giving them specific questions. So you might benefit from a little bit more structure. Right? A little bit more guidance, right? Because that part of your brain kicks in that's like, well, what am I supposed to do? This is way too open-ended. I need a plan.
But I love the idea of the comedy show and just that you guys did before Mother's Day that you mentioned, releasing that oxytocin, the serotonin, the dopamine, get those feel-good hormones going. I mean, that actually can make a really big difference. And it's a great way to connect with your partner at a time where you may be feeling a bit disconnected. It kind of fills the space, it fills the time. So you're not reflecting on Mother's Day, having to talk about Mother's Day, making plans for the following day. You really have to know yourself and to figure out what is going to work for you. And it can be something totally different than what works for somebody else in terms of how to cope with Mother's Day. And then if you are the partner of somebody going through fertility treatment, please don't try and think that you know what your partner wants. I could just see that. I could just imagine it going so poorly. Ask. Because you might get a very unexpected response. You're right. The weight that we put on Mother's Day is so different, and it's backed by years and years and years of Mother's Days and things that people have said to us, et cetera, et cetera. It's okay to do something totally different than everybody else. And it's okay to tell your partner specifically what you want, even if your partner thinks that it's a bit weird.
Yeah.
I could see that happening too, right? Just go with it.
And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter because it's not about them, right? That day is supposed to be about you and whatever that looks like, right? So even if you're not a mom yet, it can be honoring that path to Mother's Day, right? So maybe you could still buy those flowers. You could write that card that maybe isn't saying Happy Mother's Day, but is just saying something like, I admire the strength and the courage and the resiliency that you bring into everyday life, right? Something that honors those core characteristics, those values, those things that probably made you fall in love with that person, right? But removing the word mother kind of out of the equation completely can sometimes be helpful too. And creating a fun, joyful activity that can then become that new tradition that maybe in the future you're going to do with your kids, or it might look different next year. And that's okay. It's not written in stone and it can evolve and change as well.
And I have to say, it's also okay to not know what you want.
Yeah.
Right? And to just be like, I have no idea. Try something and see how it lands. And I might punch you in the face. I'm sorry, but I really don't know what to say.
Yeah.
I remember, and I still feel guilty, hopefully my parents aren't listening to this episode, but I said I was on call. I was delivering babies at the time. I said, I'm on call at the hospital. I'm not available that day. And I just stay home and watch TV all day because I didn't want to journal. I didn't want to talk. I didn't want to do anything. I wanted to avoid the day and I wanted it to pass as quickly as possible. And I mean, avoidance in general is not a great coping skill long term. And you can talk about that, Brittany, more. But for that day, it's really what I needed and what I did. And it's okay as well to do something like that and not to have a perfect, meaningful, Pinterest perfect plan.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought that up because I think that is important. If it doesn't really resonate with people or if they just feel like they don't have the emotional bandwidth, that's okay too. And so part of that is going to be engaging in some of the self-validation, right? Of given X, it's understandable that ... right? Given that I'm at this point in my fertility journey, it's understandable that I don't have the capacity to go out right now and hold it all together, right? Given that I'm where I'm at, it's understandable that I just want to stay at home and binge watch a stupid TV show, right? And avoidance, like you said, can be very negative if that's what we're doing constantly, because then we're not actually dealing with anything and we're suppressing it. And what happens when we suppress it is it's almost like that beach ball that you're in the ocean and you're pushing down the beach ball. And the harder we push, the faster it just flies up in our face. Or I use the analogy of a volcano. And that volcano is going to erupt. And usually when it erupts, it's wrong time, wrong place. If we can deal with it, if we can compartmentalize it, if we can find a way to deal with it in these smaller, manageable steps, that can ideally be more effective. But avoidance works in that in the moment, it suppresses the anxiety, right? We're not dealing with it. It enables us to cope and it enables us to find a way to move forward. And so for that day, for that 24-hour period, if that's what you really need to do, then that's okay, as long as there's the intention and that purpose behind it. And you're hopefully able to do a little bit of self-reflection and validation where you're not feeling guilty for it. You're not beating yourself up for it. And then you're able to put the steps together to then move forward the next day.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful because most people kind of assume avoidance is bad. It's just like a thing you should never do. And that you should come up with these grand plans, these deep thoughts, soul searching expeditions. But sometimes it's just kind of got to get through the day, right? And where avoidance can be helpful. We've talked a lot about somebody going through a fertility journey, fertility treatment, and their partner. But what about when we're talking about somebody who is a single mother by choice? It's a very different structure, different support network. How can somebody who is trying to become a single mother by choice navigate Mother's Day and work with their own support system? And how can people help them?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I think it's similar in terms of acknowledging that piece. If you're part of somebody's support system, that could look like sending a message of, hey, I'm thinking of you next weekend, right? I'm thinking of you today, making sure that they know that they're not forgotten, making sure that they're still included. It could look like including them in your plans. And for that single mom by choice, that could also look like saying no, or it could look like accepting, depending on where they're at. I think in terms of the support network, it's offering the support without putting pressure of, hey, you have to do this, or this is the expectation. And then offering support instead of saying, what do you need? Because I think a lot of people, that's kind of the go-to, right? Is I'm here if you need anything. And the same thing goes for if people are sick or away or something happens. But most people don't know how to respond to the what do you need because it's just too general. So instead it could be like, hey, I'm picking up Chinese food for dinner, so I'm going to drop you off some, right? Or, hey, can I take your kids to the park for a couple hours? I remember one of my friends was going through kind of part of her journey and her birthday was coming up. And so I dropped off a little self-care basket with like a candle and certain things on there. And it just basically said, thinking of you, you're amazing. And I hope you see what I see. So it was something that was fairly simple that you could really use for any occasion, just even as a, hey, I'm thinking of you. Here is a little kind of pick me up. I think another piece that's important is not to assume that you know how they feel, not to assume that you know what it's like. Sometimes we get stuck with the words. And so people will say something like, oh, this is what you chose, or, you shouldn't be feeling this way, or you should be so grateful that X, Y, and Z, right? But that's really invalidating. That's really dismissive. And the other piece is sometimes people will say, oh, I know exactly what that's like. No, we don't. Right. And in fact, we never will because we're not living their life. We're not in their shoes. So instead, it could be something like, wow, that must be really challenging. How can I help? What do you need? Right. And again, if they don't know, then maybe we throw out 3 options and hopefully they pick one of those. And sometimes I know I've said to people like, I'm here if you want to talk. I'm here if you just need a shoulder to cry on, right? If you need to vent, if you need to yell and scream, or like Dr. Garcia was talking about, you need a complete distraction. Hey, let's just go have a girls' day, right? Let's just do something silly just to escape all of that. That can be okay and healthy too.
My personal favorite is sometimes just to send a list of 3 things. 1, like heartfelt, emotional, one funny, silly, one practical, and be like, pick one, pick what I'm doing. Which direction are we going? I'm down for whatever it is, but just tell me which way we're going.
Yeah, that's a great option is you're giving them the different categories and then you're giving them that control.
I mean, I think more than anything, it's for somebody who is going through this as wanting to become a single mother by choice, knowing that they have that support network and that support network being there for them and knowing that there's multiple people who are standing behind them. I mean, regardless of the situation, it's always great to know that your people are behind you. It always feels good.
Brittany, thank you so much for all of those suggestions. Now, if somebody wanted to get in touch with you and receive therapy directly from you, how can they find you?
Yeah, so my website is brittanymarshallcounseling.ca, or I'm on Instagram as well at Brittany Marshall Counseling, and I have some kind of tidbits of advice and things like that on there. And then I also do free 15-minute consultations so people can connect to find out if it is a good fit, and then we can go from there.
Well, it's so wonderful to see you again, Brittany, and to hear that things are going well. Thank you so much for joining us and for providing us with these incredible insights and for telling us about your own journey and your own personal sort of feelings about all of this infertility. I know it's not easy, but I know that the fertility community really appreciates hearing from more individuals and people speaking up about their own journeys and their stories. Before we wrap up, what is the parting message that you would like to leave our listeners with? It doesn't have to be related to Mother's Day. It could be related to fertility, infertility in general. What would you like people to remember this episode by?
For the Mother's Day piece of it, I think what's important with that is there's so many different emotions. There's no right or wrong. And so however you're feeling about it is totally valid. The most important piece is just being aware of that, being gentle with yourself, leaning on your support system, and being able to advocate and ask for what you need. In the more general sense, for anyone who's gone through infertility or knows anyone that is, we all have so much inner strength and inner resilience that oftentimes we're not even aware of, that we haven't maybe had those opportunities to tap into. And it does make you a better and stronger person. So I think it's just being gentle with yourself, having that self-compassion, trying to find a way to generate those moments of meaning, those moments of joy, of connection, seeking support, relying on those support systems. If we're struggling, therapy works. Therapy helps. Therapy can make a huge, huge difference. So don't hesitate to reach out and to seek support, and try not to doubt that inner strength that we all have within us.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
My pleasure.
And that's a wrap for today, Superhumans.
If you're looking to connect, get social with us. Follow us on YouTube and Instagram at My Fertility Podcast, or visit us online at myconfertility.com. And don't forget, follow, subscribe, and share your favorite episode.
Thanks for listening to My Fertility Podcast and for being a vital part of our community. We know you've got this.
We're signing off until next Tuesday.
If you found this episode of My Fertility Podcast helpful, please take a moment to head over to the review section and leave us your thoughts. Your reviews and comments are incredibly valuable to us and help guide future episodes. We also welcome you to direct your questions to info@myfertilitypodcast.com.
My Fertility Podcast is produced by Rabbit Media Inc. in conjunction with Dr. Garcia and Dr. Weiss. Music, Island Memories, instrumental by Descript stock music. My Fertility Podcast is not intended to replace any type or variation thereof professional medical, health, or legal advice, nor should the content be taken as medical advice. Please contact your primary healthcare professional regarding any medical questions you may have. The information presented in this podcast is based on the knowledge and understanding of the host at the time of recording. Medical knowledge is constantly evolving, and new research may change the understanding of health-related topics. While we strive to provide accurate and up-to-date information, we do not guarantee the completeness, accuracy, or timeliness of the content. The views expressed in this podcast by guests are not those of the host or the management. This podcast is not intended to impose any type of discrimination. My Fertility Podcast and its management are not responsible for any losses, damages, or liabilities that may arise from the use of this podcast.